Hello, I'm Jordan, and today I'm going to be talking about the read along I'm currently doing of Rats by Robert Sullivan, which I'm doing with Steve Donahue in honor of Nonfiction November. And we are about halfway through this thing already, and it's been a lot of fun. Kind of the basic premise is that Sullivan kind of set up camp in an alley in Manhattan in order to observe the rats that live there over the course of about a year. But really, there is no kind of set structure to this thing, I would say, or not really any strong one. What this is, I think, really is kind of a collection of loosely connected essays about rats and about New York City and about New Yorkers, particularly about New Yorkers. There's less about rats in here than you may kind of expect, which is not actually a complaint because the stories that Sullivan tells about New Yorkers of the present and in the past are very, very engaging, and he seems to uncover fascinating ones. And I use the word uncover here because one of the points that Sullivan makes in this book is that because rats kind of live off of the refuse of humankind, and because they live in the dark corners of society, they come into contact with people who are more or less lost to history. And that's a recurring theme in the stories that are told in these chapters. The first one is involving a man that Sullivan meets named Derek, who appears to be a homeless person who was very, very intimately acquainted with rats and rat behavior. But there's also several historical people mentioned. There's a man named Jesse Gray, I believe, who organized a rent strike in the 1960s, and part of his um, one of his tactics was to bring live rats and dead rats kind of into court in order to make a point. There's also John Delury, who was a sanitation worker who unionized garbage men in New York City and then organized a massive citywide strike, which naturally led to a huge pileup of trash in Manhattan, which was a massive crisis, but also a field day for rats, naturally. And the most interesting story, I think, in the book so far is the story of a man named Kit Burns, who was basically a very disreputable person, a thug, a member of the famous, I believe it's Dead Rabbits gang in New York City in the mid 19th century. And Kit Burns had an establishment, and in that establishment, he had what was known, I guess, as a rat pit, in which people would come and pay money to watch live rats being dumped into this pit, and then watch dogs being sicked on them to kill them. And apparently, a common practice at the time was also not maybe not common, but not unheard of practice at the time was to have a man jump into the pit and murder the rats by biting their heads off. Not a pretty place. But this brings us into contact with a different man named Henry Berg, who founded the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And he got wind of what was going on in Kit Burns' establishment, and he began a campaign to stop this kind of behavior, which was largely successful. But to give some indication of the way that these animals were thought of, even by those who were trying to protect them, when the police raided Kit Burns' establishment, they, for no discernible reason, killed all of the dogs involved, and then they put all of the rats in a giant wire cage and threw the cage in the river. In one of the most upsetting, horrific details in the book, as if drowning in a mass of panicking, thrashing other rats was somehow a preferable death for these creatures. But like I said last time, and as Steve pointed out, this book is largely about the killing of rats, which is honest if it's not pleasant, because killing rats is mostly what people think about in relation to city rats, and this book is about city rats and the people who live with them. Also, just to give an indication of how fun of a writer Sullivan can be, the Transcendentalists keep appearing in this book, and Sullivan has even begun to kind of parody their style in very fun ways. I wanted to give an example of that, if I can find it here. He says, "Oh, to ponder the digestive systems of the city, to consider the vast and mundane civic processes through which the city rat is nourished and the alley filled, For in the alley I can see the city as organism itself, a creature that consumes an unimaginable quantity, that excretes, eliminates, expels! Exclamation point. That reads almost like Whitman in a very fun, um, ironic way. Uh, but I don't want to give the impression that there's not much rat talk here. The rats are kind of the core focus here, even if they're mostly an excuse to talk about human beings. But when he writes about rats, it's, of course, wonderfully well done. I wanted to give you an example of that. This is him writing about watching rats run. He said, whoops, that's the wrong one. Sorry. The idea was that he wanted to, he filmed rats in order to figure out what it looks like as they run. And he says, right, on another occasion early on, I took a video camera to the alley and filmed a rat running. I expected to see a kind of skittering, a spidery or crab-like crawl. But when I analyzed the tape, I was amazed to see that the rat was almost galloping, the hind legs pushing the front legs up and forward, resulting in an elegant mid-air arch of the rat's body. Given the darkness of the alley, it is difficult for me to say for certain, but it seems likely from the rat running tape that all of the rat's legs are in the air at some point in the typical rat gallop. I would bet on it. He's right about that. I have seen many rats run. They do hop, and what's being described here, I think, is what's known in the rat community as popcorning, which is when you have a rat that's very excited, particularly a younger rat. They will do serious, like bunny-like hops in excitement, which is unbelievable. One of the many unbelievably charming things that they do. So anyways, this has been great fun. Again, I need to kind of restrain myself from forging ahead on this thing. But let me know what you guys are thinking about it if you're reading along with us. And thank you for watching. Have a good day.